Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into some truly fascinating concepts from a text titled Strong Mind. We're going to be focusing specifically on a chapter that impartially explores something literally every single one of us has to deal with, the absolute inevitability of life's crises. Now, instead of looking at our setbacks as unnatural disasters or just, terrible luck, the source material actually frames these challenges as a highly predictable, almost mathematical curriculum of human development. So if you've ever felt like life is just throwing a constant series of hurdles at you, I think you're really going to appreciate the structured perspective we're breaking down today. Here's a quick look at the chronological journey we'll take through this framework. We'll kick things off with the 10-year crisis cycle, then look at the decades of changing trials, move right into the post-40 pivot, explore finding moderate happiness, and finally, cultivating a strong mind. Let's jump in. Section 1. The 10-year crisis cycle, rethinking a famous proverb. Get ready to challenge what you think you know about a very well-known saying.
Okay, we all know the feeling, right? You finally get things settled, you find your rhythm, and then bam! Seemingly out of nowhere, a major disruption hits. The text asks a very direct question about this. Why does unexpected suffering seem to operate on a cyclical schedule? Why do these massive hurdles always seem to appear exactly when we think we've got it all figured out?
Well, the author objectively reframes a classic proverb to answer this. We've all heard that motivational phrase, fall 7 times, get up 8. Usually, it's just meant to inspire some grit. But the text treats this as a literal, statistical reality. Think about it. If you live an average lifespan of 70 to 80 years, the math suggests you're going to face a major, life-altering crisis roughly once every decade. 7 decades means 7 massive falls. It's not bad luck, it's literally just the standard curriculum of living. Section 2. Decades of changing trials. The chronological journey. Let's look at how these predictable crises actually change shape as we get older. So, according to the text, the nature of our 10-year crises evolves alongside us. Around age 10, the trial usually shows up as family or school turbulence. By 20, we're facing the intense pressures of stepping into adulthood. At 30, the crises revolve around true independence and self-reliance. And skipping ahead to age 50, the text uses this beautiful metaphor, describing an autumn wind blowing through our lives, which is basically a realization of aging and shifting life phases. If we zoom in on those earlier years for a second, the text explicitly points out that age 10 might bring disruptions like parents losing jobs, family disputes, or heavy academic pressures. Then by age 20, the trials shift completely toward the heavy burden of entering society, facing employment realities, and navigating early adult relationships. The text emphasizes that these aren't random events. They are the exact trials required to forge an adult. Section 3. The post-40 pivot, the turning point. This brings us to what the source identifies as the most critical juncture in our entire lives. That crucial point is age 40. The text actually describes this age as reaching the absolute peak of life's mountain. So why is this specific crisis so uniquely difficult? Because, as the author notes, it's the exact moment when multiple major life factors converge all at once. Your career pressures peak as you move into management, your physical health begins to show undeniable signs of wear and tear, and complex family dynamics, like raising teenagers or caring for aging parents, hit you simultaneously. The source draws a really stark contrast here. Before our 40s, we're fueled by youthful ambition, right? We want absolute success, top marks, the ideal life across the board. But post-40s? The text suggests a profound internal recalibration is absolutely necessary. If you attempt to maintain that demand for absolute success in all areas, it's only going to lead to suffering. Instead, the post-40 pivot demands compromise and the pursuit of intermediate fulfillment. Section 4. Finding moderate happiness. Adjusting expectations. Here is the primary solution the text offers for navigating this complicated post-40 landscape. The author uses a fantastic metaphor to explain this. Imagine a monkey that reaches into a jar to grab a handful of rice, but then absolutely refuses to let go of any grains. Because its fist is now too big to fit back through the opening, it's trapped. The text argues that after 40, we have to learn to accept moderate happiness. If you try to hold on to absolute career dominance, perfect family peace, and total personal freedom all at the exact same time, you get stuck. You have to open your hands slightly, let a few grains go, and just be satisfied with an intermediate, balanced level of happiness. Which brings us to a highly counterintuitive yet deeply practical takeaway from the text. Be grateful when bad things are not happening to you. The author suggests completely reframing our baseline for happiness. Instead of constantly demanding that amazing, positive events happen to us, we should recognize that the sheer absence of disaster is actually a profound blessing. If your kids aren't acting out today or your health isn't actively failing right now, that neutral state is a form of quiet success. It's something to be incredibly thankful for. Section 5. Cultivating a strong mind, the anatomy of resilience. Let's summarize the text's advice on building the mental fortitude you need to survive these cyclical 10-year falls. The text outlines 4 key components to developing this strong mind. First, you absolutely must know your station and focus on your actual strengths, rather than fighting unwinnable battles. Second, you have to categorically stop blaming your misfortunes on other people or outside circumstances. Third, you must actively develop what the author calls a restoration force. And finally, fourth, you must use these inevitable falls to transform raw suffering into deep, enduring character. To explain this idea of a restoration force, the text uses the vivid metaphor of a buoy. Think of a buoy floating out in the ocean. The waves of life, those 10-year crises we talked about, will absolutely push it deep underwater. That is 100% guaranteed. But the defining characteristic of a buoy is its inherent restoration force. It doesn't fight the water, it just naturally, inevitably pops right back up to the surface. A strong mind isn't built to avoid being pushed down, it's built to master the art of floating back up. Furthermore, the author makes a really powerful assertion here. Enduring these crises isn't just a matter of selfish survival. It's actually the exact required mechanism for developing deep empathy. The text argues that unless you have personally experienced the sorrow of falling down, you literally cannot generate genuine kindness or compassion for the suffering of others. Your 10-year crisis is the forge that creates your capacity to love and understand your fellow human beings. Which leaves us with this final vital thought to consider. We've established the mathematical reality of the proverb. You will face a next 10-year crisis. You will fall. The only question that remains, according to the principles of a strong mind, is this. When that inevitable moment comes and you begin the hard work of floating back to the surface, what kind of light will you continually strive to shine on the world as you get back up? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning. Hey everyone, and welcome to today's explainer. So today, we're tackling something that literally every single one of us faces, but let's be honest, very few of us actually master. I'm talking about the art of turning adversity into a massive advantage. We're going to explore how one guy took arguably the absolute worst hand life could deal him and just completely reframed it to build an unbreakable mindset. I want to start by asking you a really direct question. What do you do when you hit an unbreakable wall in life? Because we all hit them, right? Maybe it's a massive career setback, a sudden financial crisis, a tough health issue, or just a deeply personal loss. In those moments, it feels like all your forward momentum just violently crashes to a halt. So what happens next? Do you freeze? Do you retreat? Or do you find some way to break through? Keep that in the back of your mind as we go, because the person we're looking at today didn't just hit one wall. No, he ran into a literal maze of them, over and over again. And yet, he somehow found a way to completely shatter them. Okay, let's dive into this. Meet our main case study for this explainer, Saburo Yoshikawa. As our source material outlines, Saburo lived what the author describes as a life of stormy seas. I mean, he absolutely wasn't born into privilege. No head starts here. Actually, his life was basically a masterclass in navigating extreme, relentless adversity. Through the author's reflections on his father's life, we get this incredible roadmap showing how raw, unfiltered hardship can be processed and used. Saburo's story isn't some depressing tragedy. It's a blueprint. To really get inside Saburo's mindset, we have to look at the sheer scale of the hurdles he faced. The text groups his struggles into 3 massive trials: poverty, illness, and conflict. And look, these weren't just passing phases. They were the foundation of his everyday life. When Saburo was just 7 years old, he lost his father. 7. He grew up in a single-mother household with 3 siblings, where just surviving the day was a grueling challenge. From a super young age, he was thrust into this harsh world, shouldering adult responsibilities, taking care of his younger siblings, all while navigating extreme scarcity. And this brilliantly illustrates the scale of his determination. 20. In a desperate bid to feed his family, Saburo worked over 20 different kinds of jobs. He didn't have the luxury of career planning or, holding out for that perfect opportunity. He just did whatever it took. If a trade could provide even a tiny bit of money to keep his family afloat, he took it.
He adapted, he pivoted, and he absolutely ground his way through unimaginable economic pressure.
But here is where his story takes a super fascinating turn. We see this crazy contrast from the harsh reality of pulling a heavy vegetable handcart on the street to this incredibly sharp intellectual fight. Because despite the poverty, and despite a body that was really weakened by severe illness in his youth, Saburo possessed this fierce, restless energy. By his 20s, he wasn't just surviving anymore, he was fighting back. He became a political activist and a chief editorial writer for a magazine. He used his writing to fiercely attack political corruption, dedicating himself to exposing a corrupt governor. He fought for everyday people who were being exploited, famously declaring that those in power must never be allowed to steal food from the mouths of ordinary citizens.
Which brings us to the central metaphor of this whole explainer. The standard view tells us that hardship is a reason to give up, right? To get bitter, to just accept defeat. But Saburo's view, which is captured beautifully by his son, is that hardship is actually nourishment for the soul. Think about that. Every trial, every failure, every bit of suffering wasn't a punishment at all. It was fertilizer. It was the exact material needed to grow this massive, robust character.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the specific phrasing used in the original Japanese text, tamashi no koyashi, nourishment, or literally fertilizer for the soul. The author specifically points out that watching his father navigate all that poverty, illness, and conflict became this exact nourishment. It shows us that our struggles literally forge our character. You don't build a strong mind in a comfortable vacuum. You build it by absorbing life's shocks and metabolizing those terrible experiences into wisdom, empathy, and just unyielding grit.
So, the crucial point is how to actually implement this. The source material distills Saburo's mindset down to a specific concept: resilience, or in Japanese, fukugen ryoku. It translates to the capacity to restore yourself, but it's defined in a really actionable way here. It's not just surviving a hit. It's the speed and capacity to bounce back after you get knocked down, insulted, or defeated. True resilience is an active, dynamic, rapid recovery process. It's that internal muscle that pulls you back to your feet when absolutely everything else is screaming at you to stay down.
Let's break down this process of dealing with failure, because it's essentially a logical three-step mechanic. Step 1, you face the wall. You don't ignore the reality of the problem. Step 2, you take the hit. As the text points out, everyone fails. Everyone gets knocked down. It even mentions the Japanese proverb, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. You are going to take hits. But step 3 is where the magic actually happens. You bounce back immediately. You don't wallow, you don't let the defeat become your whole identity, you just reset and recover fast.
I absolutely love this next detail from the text. Saburo's coworkers actually gave him a nickname because of this exact trait. They compared his baffling, unbreakable spirit to an okiagari koboshi, which is a traditional Japanese roly-poly toy. They'd say, "It's amazing. No matter how much we knock him down or scold him, he just bounces right back up." It's a slightly humorous little anecdote, but it hits the nail on the head. He might have looked deflated for a split second, but almost instantly his innate vitality would just pop him right back up. He was structurally designed internally to stand back up.
If there is one core takeaway you grab from this explainer, make it this. The true measure of strength isn't avoiding the fall, it's the speed of your recovery. Developing this rapid fukuken roku is the ultimate key to living strongly. It means giving up on the obsessive attempt to prevent every single mistake. Instead, you build the internal machinery that lets you recover so fast that a fall is nothing more than a tiny blip on your overall upward trajectory. Let's see how this builds, because this lifelong vitality didn't just end with his own survival. Saburo's unbelievable ability to act with courage, completely without fearing failure, directly inspired the author's later works, specifically a book titled The Law of Courage. Saburo had this frail body from his early illnesses, but his mind was so powerful he would literally will himself into action. He never waited for perfect conditions. He just manufactured his own momentum through sheer, courageous action. And this is the high-energy call to action that we get from this entire philosophy. Have the courage to act without fearing failure, to break through life's walls. Once you truly realize that failure is just nourishment for your soul, when you know you have the resilience to act like that roly-poly toy and just bounce back, the fear of failure completely evaporates. You are suddenly totally free to take risks, to speak your mind, start the business, or fight the good fight. Because you know for a fact that even if you hit a wall, you're going to break right through it. So I want to leave you with this final thought to chew on. We all know another wall is coming, right? It's just an inevitable part of living a full life. So the question is no longer, will I hit a wall? The real question, the one Ryuho Okawa answered every single day of his life, is when your next wall appears, how quickly will you bounce back? Will you stay down, or will you use it as fertilizer to grow even stronger? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep growing, and I'll catch you next time.
Welcome back, everyone, to another explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really fascinating philosophical framework on personal growth. We'll be exploring some core concepts presented by Ryuho Okawa, specifically homing in on this idea of spiritual maturity. You know, if you've ever just felt totally overwhelmed by life's obstacles, this text offers a highly structured and honestly kind of unconventional approach to tackling them. We're going to break down the author's precise blueprint for maturing the mind and how it can fundamentally change the way we process stress, conflict, and ultimately our own happiness. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to ask yourself a question. What if your life's biggest problems aren't actually shrinking, but you're just simply outgrowing them? The central psychological premise of our source material here is a complete paradigm shift in how we view our struggles. The text suggests that when we feel overwhelmed, it's often because we're boxed into a really small world. You know, maybe we're doubting our colleagues or even our own family members. But the author argues the solution isn't necessarily finding a direct fix to the problem itself. Instead, it's about expanding your own mind. As you grow, that anxiety relatively shrinks.
And the source material grounds this entire concept in what it calls spiritual maturity, which is specifically mapped out in Chapter 3 of the text. Think of it like zooming out the camera lens of your life. When you're zoomed in way too close, a single obstacle just fills the entire frame, right? It looks completely insurmountable. But as you achieve spiritual maturity, you widen that lens. The obstacle itself hasn't actually changed size, but your capacity to handle it has expanded so much that the problem suddenly looks way smaller and a whole lot more manageable.
Now, to lay the foundation for this growth, the author makes a very definitive argument about the ultimate goal of faith and philosophical study, stating bluntly that the purpose of religion is human growth. The text impartially asserts that true spiritual practice really isn't about seeking out external rewards or dodging bad luck or just going through the motions of rituals. The absolute core objective is internal, human development. It's the active, everyday process of nurturing your inner self.
So, what does this actually look like in practice? Well, the text defines spiritual maturity as the act of growing your inner self so that external problems, difficulties, and frustrations relatively shrink. I want you to connect this directly to your own everyday stress. Think about a time a super minor inconvenience, spilling your coffee or hitting a long red light, just completely derailed your entire day. That happens when our inner self is stretched too thin. Expanding your perspective, actually achieving this maturity, literally diminishes the raw power that life's daily roadblocks hold over you.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact roadmap the author provides to get there. The text doesn't just leave us with abstract theory. It gives us 3 concrete mental attitudes or mindset shifts that are required for this inward growth. Number 1, stop centering your own feelings. Number 2, accept diverse values. And number 3, practice forgiveness. Let's break down that first hurdle.
Step 1. Escaping the I trap.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how it diagnoses a major reason we feel paralyzed by our problems, our tendency to become the permanent victim of our own narrative. Notice the grammatical solution proposed by the text here. When we're struggling, the subject of our inner monologue is almost always I. I am hurt, I am unhappy, what about me? The author advises us to consciously shift that grammatical subject over to the other. Instead of asking, am I hurt? The mature mind asks, what is the other person feeling? This simple little pivot shifts your focus outward and actively relieves that immense internal pressure of self-pity.
To achieve this outward focus, the text tells us we need to look at situations with an open mind and a blank slate. It asks the reader to open their heart and consciously reduce the sheer amount of time we spend overthinking our own feelings. By wiping the slate clean of our own immediate biases and defensive reactions, we make room to actually see the reality of the people around us.
Section 2. Embracing diverse values.
Once we stop centering ourselves, we inevitably run into people who think entirely differently than we do. But, the text points out, humans naturally tend toward one pattern thinking. We instinctively want to use our own strengths as the universal measuring stick to judge everyone else. But using your own ruler to measure someone else's life, that usually leads to incorrect conclusions. The source material stresses that truly appreciating different viewpoints doesn't just happen by accident. It requires active, intentional effort.
But here's the catch. It's one thing to appreciate a diverse viewpoint or a different lifestyle, right? But we have to ask the really difficult question, what happens when someone truly wrongs us? What happens when encountering a diverse value system results in us getting attacked, embarrassed, or hurt? This right here is the structural hinge of the text's philosophy, and it leads us directly to its most challenging concept.
Section 3. Forgiveness, the shortcut to happiness. Let's move on and see how this builds. The author doesn't just frame forgiveness as claiming some moral high ground. Instead, it's presented as a necessary shortcut to your own happiness. To understand this, the text uses a pretty brilliant metaphor, the whetstone. Think of bad relationship experiences, whether that's a terrible boss or a really painful breakup, as rough stones used to sharpen a blade through friction. Yes, these unpleasant people create friction in your life, but that friction is the exact mechanism required to polish and refine your character. In a way, they're playing the villain in your story, just so you have the resistance you need to grow.
And because they actually serve this hidden purpose, the text urges us to reach an elevated state of mind, arguing that forgiveness is a religious state of mind. The author points out that modern society, especially in schools or the workplace, is constantly teaching us to judge, evaluate, and condemn others for their failures. But true happiness requires us to abandon that judgment entirely. Forgiving someone who wronged you is described here as reaching a deeply spiritual state, one that completely transcends our everyday societal norms of retaliation.
I want you to think of a personal grudge you might be holding on to right now. The text contrasts these two states perfectly. Holding a grudge is described as eternal emotional bondage. It literally keeps you chained to the person who hurt you. You might think holding that grudge punishes them, but in reality, it only traps you. Forgiving, on the flip side, is framed almost as a selfish shortcut to your own happiness. You aren't yielding to an enemy, you are simply refusing to let them dictate your emotional state for even one more second.
This leads to an incredibly comforting assertion from the text. If you are happy now, past misfortunes become beautiful stories. The author argues that achieving a stable, happy state of mind in the present actually retroactively transforms how we view our past traumas. When you finally reach that state of maturity and happiness, you look back at the people who hurt you not with anger, but with the understanding that their actions were merely the whetstone that sharpened you into the person you are today.
And finally, our last section, the duty to be happy.
We've covered the internal shifts of escaping the I, accepting diverse values, and forgiving. Now the text transitions its focus outward. We hear a lot about the right to pursue happiness, but the author boldly declares that everyone actually has a duty to be happy. Happiness isn't merely some passive right that society owes you. It is an active obligation that you must fulfill.
So the absolutely crucial point here is this. Becoming happy is a duty we owe to ourselves and the world to create a better society. Your happiness isn't just about you. The text argues that when individuals take accountability for their own spiritual maturity, when they stop holding grudges, stop centering themselves, and actually forgive, they stop projecting their pain onto society. By fulfilling your personal duty to be happy, you are actively contributing to transforming the world into a better, more utopian place.
It's a pretty heavy yet incredibly empowering thought to leave on. The text flips the script entirely. Instead of waiting around for the world to make you happy, the world is actually waiting for you to mature so that you can fulfill your duty to it. So I'll leave you with this final provocative thought derived from today's explainer. If happiness is your duty to the world, what steps will you take to fulfill it today? Will you widen your lens? Will you forgive? Keep learning, keep expanding that perspective, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really profound philosophical shift that every single one of us eventually faces. We're talking about that moment when you realize the metrics for winning at life fundamentally change after your 20s. We're pulling this directly from Chapter 4 of our source material, appropriately titled Living with a Rich Heart. It makes a fascinating argument. While our youth is absolutely the time to chase raw ability and individual success, simply surviving and actually finding true fulfillment from midlife on requires a totally different skill set. It requires a richness of heart.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with youthful ambitions and success, move into the midlife transition, discuss embracing your human duties, explore impartiality and selflessness, and finally end with blessing others' success. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Youthful Ambitions and Success and the Pursuit of the Elite Track. You know exactly how it is in those early years, right? Our primary goal is almost always measurable individual success. We're fiercely focused on proving how fast we can think, trying to land that prestigious job, or fighting to get on whatever society considers the elite track. It's an era of pure, unadulterated ambition. And honestly, that's exactly how it should be. That drive to push your intellect to its absolute limits is totally valid.
During this phase, if someone comes up to you talking about abstract concepts like richness of heart, it probably sounds completely irrelevant. And why wouldn't it? Your absolute priority right now is building your capabilities, proving you're useful, and racking up some social recognition or wealth. You want to see the immediate, tangible rewards of your hard work. Basically, you're a solo runner in a sprint, and you are entirely focused on your own speed and your own form.
But then everything starts to shift, which brings us to Section 2, the midlife transition, and navigating life's changing rules.
Take a look at this timeline, mapping out life's distinct crises. Notice the critical pivot that happens right around our 30s and 40s. This is when the sheer weight of totally new responsibilities, things like raising a family, physical changes to our bodies, and incredibly complex professional trials, forces a drastic change in our worldview. You literally can't just run fast anymore. You have to start navigating the terrain. The autumn wind of life begins to blow, so to speak.
So that individual, self-centered success of your 20s, it has to transform. The mid-game brings on this highly collaborative, relationship-heavy reality, where having a richness of heart becomes absolutely necessary just to survive. Honestly, if you try to play the mid-game using the hyper-competitive, self-focused rules of your 20s, you are going to burn out, or worse, you'll end up alienating everyone around you.
As you transition into managerial roles at work or step into parental roles at home, your success isn't just about you anymore. It's about how gracefully you can operate within this giant complex web of other people. Your strength isn't measured by how fast your brain processes information anymore, but by how well you can manage, uplift, and truly coexist with the people around you.
So how do we actually do that? That's Section 3, embracing your human duties, and the shift from rights to responsibilities. The source material raises a really provocative point here. It notes that young people naturally demand their rights, all while desperately trying to escape their responsibilities. But it argues this desire to flee from duty is just a basic, animalistic self-preservation instinct. True maturity means moving past that instinct. It means waking up to the fact that constantly seeking freedom without taking on responsibility just keeps you trapped in a state of spiritual infancy. Think of the classic fable of the ant and the grasshopper. Fulfilling your duties, whether that's showing up as a diligent worker, being a reliable neighbor, or acting as a devoted family member, is exactly what creates an unshakable, bottom-heavy resilience for your later years. The grasshoppers who dodge their duties? Sure, they might have a super fun summer, but they completely lack the foundation required to survive the autumn and winter of life.
By consciously embracing the heavy obligations of the mid-game, basically stepping up to be the responsible ant instead of running away from the weight, you earn this genuine, deep-seated confidence. And it's not that flashy, loud confidence of youth either. It's a quiet, grounded assurance that physically expands the capacity of your heart.
Now for Section 4, impartiality and selflessness, and stepping away from extreme judgments.
So what exactly do we mean by impartiality and selflessness? Well, it's the spiritual maturity to stop constantly seeking praise and to stop harshly judging everybody else. We have to cultivate a fair, selfless mindset that doesn't get completely derailed by fleeting, everyday emotions. It's about looking at the world with a steady, unbiased gaze, instead of constantly viewing people through the lens of how they either benefit or hinder you.
History actually gives us a brilliant example of this with Saigo Takamori, a hugely prominent figure in Japanese history. Even while commanding forces during brutal conflicts like the Boshin War, his perfectly impartial and selfless attitude eventually earned him the deep love and respect of his bitterest enemies. He didn't gloat when he won. He didn't punish excessively. He operated from a much higher place of fairness.
The idea is that if you practice this kind of impartiality over decades, especially as you start gaining power, wealth, or social status, the authentic brilliance of your character naturally draws people to you. As the text says, once your soul's true metal begins to shine, you won't even have to demand respect or force people to follow you. Your sheer character will just magnetically attract them.
Which brings us to our final point, Section 5, blessing others' success. This is truly the ultimate test of your vessel.
Let's be totally real with ourselves for a second. It is a deeply ingrained human flaw to feel a little twinge of quiet jealousy or even a sense of personal defeat when we witness someone else succeeding. And because of that, we hesitate to offer praise out loud. We stay silent because complimenting them kind of feels like admitting we lost. But the truth? Holding back that praise only shrinks our own world.
So, let's look at the practical application here. There are 3 key steps to get past this. First, you have to internally acknowledge their hard work. Second, actively suppress your own ego, your jealousy, and that nagging sense of defeat. And third, this is absolutely crucial, you have to verbally and honestly express your blessing to them out loud. Doing this actively stretches your emotional maturity. It is literal heavy lifting for your soul.
Think about this specific scenario. Say you only make a very modest salary, but you genuinely and warmly bless a friend who just achieved massive financial success. Doing that proves the sheer size of your spirit. The text notes that acting with this kind of genuine grace can even forge connections that open entirely new, unexpected paths in your own life, simply because people are naturally drawn to that kind of energy.
As we wrap up today's explainer, I really want to leave you with a profound challenge. Take a hard look at your current metrics for success. Are you still running that exhausting individual marathon of your 20s? Or are you actively building a vessel large enough to embrace your duties, practice impartiality, and genuinely bless the success of the people around you? Maturing past the rat race of youth to cultivate a permanently rich heart, that is the real secret to winning at the later stages of life. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.
All right, let's jump right into this fascinating breakdown of what it actually takes to build a resilient, powerful mind over a lifetime. Welcome to our latest explainer. Today, we're exploring the profound concepts from Chapter 5 of our source text, which is titled Strong Mind. You know, we often look at people who seem completely unflappable when disaster strikes, or leaders who carry these just massive burdens with total grace, and we kind of just assume they won the genetic lottery, right? We think, oh, they were just born tough. But the philosophy we're unpacking today argues something completely different, and honestly, it's a whole lot more empowering.
We're kicking things off by completely shattering a massive myth. The source puts it pretty bluntly. Absolutely no one is magically born with an unbreakable will. Instead, it's something you actually have to earn through life's struggles. Think about that for a second. We tend to look at historical figures or incredibly resilient people, right? At the very end of their journeys, we see their finished, polished character. But what we don't see are the decades of quiet struggle, the failures, and the deliberate, gritty effort it took to build that mental armor.
So that brings us to the core question of our explainer today, and it really challenges us to discover the exact mechanics of mental growth. If you can't inherit a strong mind, and you sure can't buy one, what is the actual process for forging it? Well, the source material lays out a very specific, almost architectural blueprint for how human character must evolve, decade by decade. And spoiler alert, it demands some very intentional work.
Here's our roadmap for how we'll break this down. First, we'll tackle the myth of innate strength. Second, the 2 pillars of the mind. Third, Stage 1, brilliant youth. Fourth, Stage 2, heroic leader. And finally, Stage 3, deep serenity. Let's get to it.
Section 1. The myth of innate strength. Let's dismantle this idea once and for all.
It is just so incredibly easy to use talent or nature as an excuse for why we aren't handling our own lives well. But the source makes a brilliantly blunt observation here. Babies don't possess willpower. I mean, when a baby is born, it doesn't have a strong will. It just cries. True strength is something that actually gets layered onto us as we navigate the inevitable hurdles of human existence. It's a direct byproduct of successfully overcoming the exact trials that life throws our way.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 2 pillars of mind. This is all about the dual engines of aspiration and stability.
So, if we want to train our minds, we really need to understand these dual engines. The absolute crucial point here is balancing 2 very distinct forces. On one hand, you absolutely need the aspiration to grow, but on the other, you desperately need the emotional stability to survive the setbacks. The source calls these the aspiration to improve and the ordinary mind. Aspiration is that burning desire to be better today than you were yesterday. But listen, if you only have ambition, failures are going to crush you, and that's exactly why you need that second pillar. The ordinary mind is all about maintaining a flat, unshakable emotional baseline regardless of whether you're succeeding wildly or failing miserably. The source illustrates this ordinary mind concept using a really beautiful metaphor.
It's like a tiny leaf boat riding the waves of a raging flood. When the floodwaters of sorrow or a major crisis start to rise, your mind shouldn't rigidly fight the water. If you do that, you'll just snap. Instead, you need to ride those massive waves just like a tiny, buoyant leaf. You absorb the shock of the wave without ever sinking. You don't let grief drown you, but you also don't let massive success make you arrogant enough to think you can walk on water. You just keep floating.
Now, the source notes something really interesting. Life throws specific, predictable crises at us every single decade. And because of that, our character has to evolve chronologically to meet those new challenges. Think about it. You aren't meant to have the exact same mental toolkit at age 40 that you had at 20. In your 20s, you face the trial of becoming an adult. In your 30s, it's the trial of true independence. And in your 40s, you're hit with professional hurdles and physical changes. Because the crises change, your character fundamentally has to transform to keep up.
This builds out a really fascinating timeline of human capacity, highlighting 3 distinct stages of character that we all have to pass through as we age. And this isn't just about getting older, right? It's about a total metamorphosis of how you interact with the world and how you solve problems. You start off as a sharp individual, you evolve into an expansive leader, and ideally, you culminate as a profound thinker.
Which brings us to Section 3, Stage 1, Brilliant Youth. This is the foundation.
Our first stop on this developmental arc usually spans our teens and 20s. The Eastern philosophical term used here is Somei Saiben, which essentially defines a person who is incredibly sharp, quick-witted, and highly capable of intellectual problem-solving. This is your classic high achiever. Your brain works fast, you can articulate complex ideas clearly, and you can slice right through a problem with surgical precision. It is an absolutely essential foundational stage. You definitely want to be this capable young person.
But here is the catch. While being a young, brilliant perfectionist is a fantastic start, the source warns that staying in this solo mindset will eventually cause you to hit a massive wall in your career and personal growth. Why? Well, because the brilliant youth is a perfectionist. They are fantastic at doing the work themselves, but they're often pretty terrible at dealing with the messy, unpredictable reality of other human beings. If you stay trapped in this phase, you basically become that super sharp employee who just gets frustrated because nobody else works as fast or as perfectly as you do. We've all been there, or at least we've all worked with that person. The reality is, you simply cannot build a large-scale project or lead a great organization if you're still operating with a solo mastery mentality.
That means we have to evolve. Section 4, Stage 2, Heroic Leader. It's time to expand your vessel.
To break through those limitations of youth when we hit our 30s and 40s, we have to transition into what's called Rairaku Goyu. At this point, the focus makes a massive shift away from individual brilliance. Now, it's about having the immense character, or what Eastern philosophy refers to as a large vessel, required to actually lead others. It's all about becoming broad-minded and deeply magnanimous. You are no longer trying to prove you're the smartest person in the room. Instead, you're actively expanding your capacity to hold the ambitions, and yes, the flaws, of dozens or even hundreds of other people.
Because true leadership isn't about being the smartest anymore. It's really about having the capacity to accept others' flaws, forgive their mistakes, and genuinely inspire people to follow you. The source explicitly points out that at this stage, your actual job is to allow people to make errors and to patiently correct them without crushing their spirit. And let me tell you, it takes about a decade of deliberate, hard practice to reshape your mind from a sharp perfectionist into a broad, forgiving leader that others actually want to rally behind.
And eventually we reach Section 5, Stage 3, Deep Serenity, the stage of profound wisdom.
As we move into our 50s and beyond, we ideally reach Shinshin Kocho. This is a profound state of being incredibly deep, quiet, and heavily dignified. The source actually uses the famous historical figure Saigo Takamori as the prime example of this archetype. It's a stage where you are no longer loud and you aren't forcefully leading from the front anymore. Instead, you possess this massive, almost gravitational presence. You are grounded, deeply thoughtful, and you just do not react impulsively to anything.
Instead of reacting lightly or constantly trying to show off a quick intellect, a person at this stage processes information deeply in total silence. And that makes them capable of handling literally national-level crises without even flinching. This is the ultimate ordinary mind fully realized in practice. When catastrophic events occur, this kind of person doesn't panic. They just sit with the weight of the problem. They provide that deep, quiet wisdom that a family, a company, or even a nation desperately needs to navigate its darkest hours. Their very presence inspires absolute, unwavering trust.
The source makes a really fascinating distinction here. emphasizing that while Western thought often stops at just rewarding sheer intellect, Eastern philosophy demands that we reach for this higher, unmoving state of deep wisdom. I mean, in a lot of modern cultures, we practically worship the sharp, quick-talking innovator, but this text invites us to look higher, toward a really profound stillness. It strongly suggests that a mind truly forged by decades of trials doesn't actually need to shout to be heard. Its real power lies entirely in its unshakable depth.
Okay, let's pull all of this together with a quick side-by-side comparison. This is a great way to clearly spot exactly which stage of character development you are currently navigating. Are you in your 20s, honing your solo mastery and your sharp wit? Are you in your 30s or 40s, doing the really difficult work of expanding your vessel to lead and forgive others? Or are you moving toward that deep, unshakable serenity of profound wisdom? Honestly, identifying where you are right now is the crucial first step to knowing exactly what kind of mental training you need to tackle next.
The really big takeaway here is that it takes a solid 10 to 20 years of deliberate effort to master each one of these stages. But doing this incredibly hard work is exactly what grants you true, joyful freedom. See, freedom isn't about avoiding hardship or just doing whatever you feel like in the moment. According to this philosophy, true freedom is the immense joy of consciously shaping your own character over decades. It's the ultimate satisfaction of looking back and realizing you didn't let the floods of life drown you. Instead, you built a much stronger boat.
So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Look at the exact stage of life you are in right now, and ask yourself, are you actively forging your own strong mind, or are you just letting the floodwaters carry you away? Remember, nobody is born with this strength. It's waiting for you to build it. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive today. I really hope this gives you a powerful new framework for whatever trials you might be facing next.